items. If there's anything that you ever want me to address to the group, or if you have any questions, please contact me, and I will add that to the housekeeping so that everyone can benefit. Also, if you have any need for clarification, please email me so that I can help you out with that. Email is the best way to get in touch with me. I can respond to email much more quickly than I can a message through Canvas. That we always provide parents with their rights. Rights are very important so that not only is the parent and the student protected, but the school as well. When we're talking about rights in special education, it is a two-way street. So it's really important that a parent understands that, understands both sides of the coin, but it's also important that we are doing the right thing for the child, which really is where these parents' rights come into play. I hope you get a chance or have gotten a chance to take a look at the procedural safeguards through Virginia's Department of Education, as well as the articles that I included about the readability of these safeguards. I think it's important to remember that oftentimes when we have students with disabilities, it's possible that parents may also have disabilities. This is particularly true for learning disabilities where we know there is a genetic component. It's also important to understand that not all of our parents speak English as a first language. So offering these procedural safeguards in their native language is also extremely helpful. The procedural safeguards are very dense, and even as an educator, they are sometimes hard to decipher and hard to understand in terms of the meaning behind the language that's offered in safeguards. So just something to be cognizant of when you're working with parents. When we talk about working with parents or working with families, even when the legislation and the regulations talk about parents, it's important to understand that we're not just talking about a mother and a father, biological parents. We could be talking about any nucleus of people. We could be talking about foster placements, we could be talking about guardian ad litems, we could be talking about grandparents, aunts and uncles who have guardianship. So just remember that when we use the word family or parent, we may not be speaking traditionally about a biological mother and father. So that's an important component to keep in mind. The other thing that's really important to understand is what the family's particular needs are. I've worked in a lot of locations where my families did not have their basic needs met. So they needed a lot of support in order to become a member of the school community. It was very hard sometimes to engage them in collaboration because either they were working a great deal and didn't have the time or didn't have the luxury of being able to take off, or they didn't potentially see the value in education. I've also worked in places where families have been so involved in the school to the point of being maybe almost members of the school community, volunteering all the time, always willing to contribute. And so that's really kind of walking that line between when do I engage them in collaboration, where is the line for where we are just talking about involving school personnel versus bringing in our parents who are always in the schools. So it's important just to understand the needs of families when you're working with individual students or groups of students in your school, particularly as it comes with special education, because so many of our students need wraparound services. So we need to understand the family nucleus, who is the family, what is their socioeconomic status, what is their availability in terms of extra time, extra funds, or having support within their own family to be able to help their own child. I'm not going to read all the bullet points on the slide, and I'll let you kind of look at them and listen maybe separately or together, whatever works best for you. But I think that the biggest thing on this particular slide is that you cannot understand an individual without understanding how they fit into the family. Our children are incredibly dynamic, and so many of them have very unique relationships within their own family. Some of them are the male role model in their family. Some of them are following in the footsteps of extremely bright siblings or siblings who have made very poor choices. Some of our students are living in households where there is mental illness. Others are living in households where there are two professionals who are working 12 hours a day. There's such a range of what our students deal with, but until we really understand where they come from, it's very difficult to understand what we can do to support them as well. So, just take into consideration what each student brings to the table in terms of their own family dynamic. In this area, we are exposed to a lot of culture, a lot of different cultural groups, languages, and ethnicities. So I think that we are very lucky that we don't have this micro view of what culture really is. But I also think it's important to remember that when we're talking about culture or ethnicity or language or racial groups, that we don't get into generalizations because those groups are not homogeneous. Those groups are not pure. There's a lot of variation even within groups. So just be conscientious if you're talking about some of your students who are from Hispanic backgrounds, or if you're talking about students who speak a certain language, that you're not kind of lumping them all together and making a general assumption about that group as a whole. As we continue talking about the family structure, which really does kind of build on what we do as special educators as we try to individualize instruction, it's also nice to think about families and even students on continuums. So if you can imagine thinking about your own family and having a scale between interdependence and independence, about how your family interacts with one another. Are they strongly independent? Do they go down to the right side of the scale? Or are you strongly interdependent? So you would go to the left side of the scale. So you kind of plot yourself on that continuum. And then you go to the next one. Do you have a nurturing environment or an independent environment? Which end of that scale are you on? And as you kind of go down, you think about how families work together and your values within each of those continuums, you could see that you would get this kind of back and forth on each of these scales, and that would give your family this profile, what your individual family looks like. And I think that that's a helpful way sometimes to think about our students and our families when they're coming in and they're trying to, and they are explaining what their child's struggles are, what their strengths are, to understand what does their continuum look like, to give you perspective on some of the challenges, strengths, strategies, supports that a family might need as you move forward with developing things like IEPs or family support plans. There's a lot on this slide, and I highlighted some things that I really wanted to make sure stood out, but there's two on here I want to speak to specifically. One is that at all costs, when you're working with students who are culturally diverse, that you make an effort to understand how that family views the disability. It may be the case that they view disability as a weakness, or that something is wrong with the child and the child is never going to be successful because that is all that they know about the disability. So take the time to learn from the parents what they think the disability means, and then share with them what we know as educators. I think that that's really important as you start developing an IEP and you are trying to work with a parent and develop that shared vision and develop a team. If you don't understand where they're coming from and what their preconceived notions are, what their perceptions are of disabilities or even special ed, it's really hard to move forward because you're not on the same page, and therefore a lot of times your goals aren't matched up. So take that time. The other thing that I really encourage you to do is to get feedback from the parent about the special ed process and about, what's happening with their child. See if you are conveying information to them in a way that's culturally responsive, that is easily understood, and that really just kind of meets their needs. So again, take a look at the slide, look at all the different components here. There's a lot of really great points about being culturally responsive. As we start talking about parent involvement, it's important to note that parent involvement can range from everything from a parent who sits on the couch in the evening and cuddles with their child and listens to their day, to reading a book, to volunteering at the school fundraiser, or serving on a school or district-wide committee. So there's lots of different ways that parents can be involved. But if we want optimal parent involvement, if we want our parents at meetings, we want our parents to take part in what we're doing, it requires timely information. So letting parents know when something's coming, or giving them the paperwork ahead of time so that they can look it over. So that's a really key component of parent involvement. A lot of counties are also starting to do this by doing parent surveys. So you're starting to see more of a reciprocal relationship with feedback going both ways so that counties can strengthen how they are interacting with parents and really expanding the parameters of what it means to be involved. Let's start breaking down how the law talks about parental involvement and how it talks about parent rights. So the term parent involvement is included in NCLB, the No Child Left Behind Act, which is now ESEA, and there are sections of the website for ESEA and NCLB that are dedicated specifically to parents. There are sections of the website that are designed to assist parents in understanding the impact of the law on students. And since this law applies to all students, it's really significant for parents of children who are in special education programs and have special ed services. The law applies to all students regardless of the setting where that child's receiving instruction. So the piece about parent involvement is pretty heavy when you look at the NCLB information. Moving into IDEA, although the phrase parent involvement is not used, there are something like a smidge under 1,300 uses of the term parent in the federal rules and regulations. And remember, parent doesn't just mean that biological mother and father. There's a number of people who could fall under that parental role, but the term parent is used in multiple sections, including the participation in the IEP process, everything from identification, evaluation, educational placement, the option to invite other individuals to participate in meetings, procedural safeguards, what the rights are under the law, including due process. Due process includes the parent's rights to file the formal complaint and request a due process hearing. There's also information for parents about parents on independent educational evaluations. And if you go to the next slide, the term parents is also tied into receiving timely notices with the changes in an IEP as well as progress reports. Not only do parents have certain rights and responsibilities, but there are also responsibilities that are required of the local education agency. So the onus of that falls onto the school districts. Parents are required to have prior written notice. So if there is going to be any sort of meeting that could potentially change or initiate a change that have anything to do with an IEP, with identification,